expecting about a dozen participants and planning for a really personal session with people chatting to each other and sharing experiences and live guidance in doing stuff. But Jen emailed me to say they had to cap the numbers because we were maxing out. So what did I do right? Well, I think first I read and understood the data that the Curve had collected from their community. And I shifted my pitch to meet that need. I think that's an important lesson for me anyway. Secondly, I thought that Friday after lunch would be a great time for most working people with an interest in data to not have meetings, to leave their emails and do something different before clocking off for the weekend. And I think thirdly, I got lucky by being interested in something that hopefully you're all interested in too. I guess that's why you're here. But I got something wrong, and this is kind of confession time. The emails that or the correspondence that I'd had with the Curve and with Third Sector Lab, I assumed Third Sector Lab was actually part of the Third Sector Publishing Group. And as a result, I wasn't expecting to have a mainly Scottish audience. Now, Scotland's okay, right? When the National Archives of Scotland get around to digitising the Christmas pantomime programmes and attendance records of the Dingwall players, historians will note an extraordinary day-on-day increase in the audience in the 1998 Christmas panto season. And that's largely due to the half Scots, half Cockney pantomime policeman. That was me, and I loved it. My difficulty with Scotland is data-driven. My difficulty with Scotland is data-driven. I've spent the last 18 months collecting data on England and Wales and a bit on Spain, but not on Scotland. But don't worry, I've rectified it. So over the last week, I've been working on delivering something that should be really useful to you by looking at what I've learned in the places that I know and how those would be applicable to the places that you know. I guess you're all here because you share a thirst for understanding more about this data thing that everybody's pushing. I suspect that many of you know loads more about the stuff I'm going to be talking about this afternoon than I do, and I won't be offended if you leave because I'm insulting your intelligence. So let me introduce myself. I'm Tim Kershaw, I'm an architect, and I continue to practice on the edges of the profession, the edges which coincide with identifying what people need and what they want. But I reached a conclusion a few years ago that the problems are often poorly solved by construction work. And if the same rigor and resources went into the early stages of thinking before a building's even considered as go into a big capital project, there could be less need for spending lots of money and maybe a better, fairer society. I'm not saying we don't need new or repurposed buildings, we do. It's just that most of the projects that I've worked on in my architectural career, I felt that the resources could have been better invested in other ways if my clients had had more information when they were writing their briefs. I've got an interest in place, which is a fairly new term, I think, and which I define as the understanding of the power, the people, nature, and money that interact in a particular geographically defined space. I love the word community, but I hate that I can't define it. I'm a fellow of the Institute of Place Management, which is in England running the High Streets Task Force, and I'm also a master's student of Place Management and Leadership at Manchester Metropolitan University. In 2019, I founded a community interest company called Place and Purpose to help voluntary sector organisations and community activists to succeed in their goals through the use of data for creating winning narratives. Wearing this particular place-shaped hat, I'll get cracking. Everything I'm going to share with you is self-taught, and it's based on the stuff that, if somebody had explained to me earlier, would have saved me a lot of time investigating. So what I've promised to deliver you today is a greater awareness of free software platforms for visualizing and analyzing data, a greater awareness of open data sources, skills in visualizing data to gain a better understanding of the places where you work and to guide decisions, and confidence to explore and learn more for yourself. So when I mistakenly mixed up Third Sector Lab and Third Sector, I came across in the Third Sector website their jobs page. And I noticed on this page that there was a count next to each of the different sectors that they'd identified within the third sector. So I copied and pasted this web content into Excel, and I created a simple bar chart. With the exception of the funky colours, which will make more sense later, I suspect that everyone in the audience would know how to make a table into a bar chart.
Tim, I'm really sorry to interrupt. Are you sharing screen at the moment?
Oh, has nobody seen anything?
No, just when you're talking about visuals there, I thought you were doing you're talking at the moment, but I just wanted to highlight that we can't see anything.
Thank you very much. Right. Okay, so this was my starting point. I went through the things that I promised to offer you, and so now you see my screen, don't you? Yep.
Yep, we're all good now.
Great. So this was the third sector jobs website, where you can see that within the sectors they have put automatically there's a count of the number of jobs which are being advertised, and I thought that was quite useful for understanding the structure of the third sector, the voluntary sector. And so I put this into an Excel chart, just copied and pasted the data into Excel and produced a simple bar chart, which, with the exception of the funky colors, which will make sense a bit later, I expect that everybody would know how to do. Just in case you don't, you highlight your data, you click on the 2D column icon, and it creates a chart for you. So this is the chart that I created, and I think it's quite informative with regard to the split of the various different sectors within the voluntary sector. So now I'd like to try doing a little survey. Actually, I've got a link that I'd like to, oh, I can't paste the link. So let's see if this works. So if people in the audience have a mobile phone to hand or another device, it's probably easier than switching across to the internet. But if you could go to www.menti.com and then type in the code 8518 space 4085 and answer the questions that come up on the screen for you, and we'll see how this relates. We've got our first answer. Looking good. Do we have a count anywhere? I don't think we do. Give it a few more seconds. Okay, so I think, oh no, there's still some people voting. Right, I'll see if I can put the two screens adjacent to one another. So these are the live results compared with, do you see both of my screens, both of the windows right now?
Yep, we can see them both, Tim.
Yes, okay. So it's quite interesting that the color scheme was in order to be able to easily cross-reference between the two. There's a similar kind of distribution, but the social care and welfare seems to be less represented in the participants today. I'll crack on. Wait. Right, so this presentation is going to be in 4 parts. The first part about data, spatial data, statistical geography, and visualizing data. So, about data. So there's lots of jargon around data. There's a debate about whether the word data itself is a countable or uncountable noun. So in some branches of academia, they insist that data indicates something in the plural, whereas journalists would typically say that the data indicates something in the singular. It's a pedant's paradise, and I'll probably flip between both of them. Big data is, as a kind of layman's description, it's stuff that's too big for an Excel spreadsheet. I'll be showing you that you don't need to be a computer scientist to use it, and that there are free tools that you can use on a normal computer for processing and visualizing big data. Open data is defined as data that can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anybody, subject only at most to the requirements to attribute and share alike. That's, sorry, open government data is therefore kind of defined by the same criteria. And the section, the circle here which says my data is data that I collect, as in the survey I just conducted, or my address book, my calendar, my bank account, or my medical records. As you see in the nice diagram on the screen, there are overlaps between all of these categories. I've added a couple of additional categories to this diagram. So on the left-hand side, we have closed government data. What I mean by this is government data which isn't freely shared, which isn't open. Stuff that you can't use without paying for it or signing license agreements. It's a hurdle to many people across the community and private sectors that land ownership, for example, is shrouded in secrecy. On the other hand, few would be against the protection of data held on individuals by government. Community data, which is the green circle I've added, might be divided in 2 parts, perhaps. There's data that's collected by the community, for example, through citizen science, and data that's collected, maintained, and managed by an open online community, such as OpenStreetMap or Wikipedia. I'm going to show you some examples of my favorite sources of place-specific data from around these different fields. So, starting off with Strava. So Strava is an application that some of you might have come across, which is used by people doing exercise, running, walking, swimming. And in the examples that I'm going to be giving today, I'm going to be focusing on one place, which is Edinburgh, and particularly on the area around Holyrood. So if we zoom in here, it takes a little bit of time to gain the resolution. The quality is not great because I think my my internet speed isn't that great. But what we're seeing here is people running and walking with a mobile phone, and the sum of all of the people who have moved along different routes. What's quite interesting is that if I switch to the bicycle profile, you can see, for obvious reasons, that bikes aren't going to the same places that people are walking. Something I found quite interesting, zooming out a little bit and switching to swimming, was the vast amount of is it called wild swimming that people are doing off the coast. Another great source of data for some users is TripAdvisor. Now, here I'm opening the website of TripAdvisor for the Palace of Holyrood House. Now, if we scroll down to the views of people, we've got obviously all of the ratings and things. But another thing that you can do just with a website like this, which is very place specific, is if I go to Google and I write word cloud, there are several applications online. Such as this one, wordclouds.com. And if I go to the file menu and say open URL, and then copy that URL, the website address, then in a short time, it will show me what people are commenting about that particular place, that particular area. In the sector that you all work in, you're probably familiar with the resource 360 Giving. 360 Giving is a great resource for seeing where funds are coming from and where they're being spent. They've got a tool called GrantNav, which is quite easy to use, and where all of the data is absolutely open in the sense that I've described before, that it can be downloaded and reused without license. The National Library of Scotland has got a brilliant resource, which is excellent for the whole of the UK and used by people all over the UK, where there are side-by-side maps. I've got a cookie, I accept. Side-by-side maps of places where you can see how the place is today and how it was back in time. And you can change in this left panel the date of the map that you're seeing to investigate the particular place. An example of a citizen science project that has collected data for several years is the Big Garden Birdwatch, which is run by the RSPB. This is also open data. It's millions of people from around Britain who count the number of birds that land on their garden. And it was particularly successful during the months of lockdown. Now, at the bottom of the page here, you can download PDF documents about the results, but you can also download an Excel spreadsheet, which, let's see if this is fast. Which shows us broken down into the various different places. So we're starting with Aberdeenshire, the ranking of the various different species. So what's fun about this is that you can take this data and then you can compare different places and compare to the mean. Within the field of open government data, there's an enormous amount of data available. I think that possibly some of the most useful tables which are downloadable and with an open license are the Index of Multiple Deprivation, which in Scotland was published in 2020, the last time. Census results, which you're going to have to wait another couple of years for those results to come out. Information about population and demographics and health and election results and so on. If you're not sure whether all of this data stuff is maybe a bit overhyped, look at the growth in the number of data centers from 2013 to 2019. These are the places that governments and businesses contract to hold their data. This is what's called the cloud, I suppose. Billions of silicon chips remembering everything. And just from 2013 to 2019, the number of those has tripled. I don't know what's happened since 2019. With regard to government open data, in 2019, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who you'll know was the inventor of the internet, co-founded the World Wide Web Foundation, along with Rosemary Leith. The World Wide Web Foundation run what's called the Open Data Barometer that tracks the advances of countries around the world in sharing government data openly. The UK ranked second in the last report. It scored first in the previous one. If we look at the UK's scores, and in fact scores, to be fair, from many countries, the readiness and implementation of open data by governments typically scores higher than impact. Now, the Open Data Barometer naturally shares its data openly, and so I was able to download a spreadsheet file on the with all of the metrics that they're using. And what we can see is that out of a score of 7, one question has really dragged the UK down in its score in that field. And that question is, to what extent has open data had a noticeable impact on increasing the inclusion of marginalized groups in policy making and accessing government services? I think this is part of what we're addressing today. The Scottish Government in 2015 published their open data strategy, which was planned to be from 2015 to 2020, and I think it's due an update. The open data strategy states that open data is non-personal and non-commercially sensitive. It's easily discoverable, accessible to everyone, and can be freely used, reused, and redistributed by anyone. Open data is made available via the internet in an electronic format which supports its ready reuse, and with open licensing which allows its reuse. This table on the left is from the same strategy document, and I find it interesting that with this kind of 3-pillar approach, that the Scottish Government has placed the wider social and economic benefits at the top of the diagram. The strategy identifies 3 kinds of audience for their data. There are seekers, who are people who need data presented to them in tables and graphics. There are enthusiasts, people who lack formal skills but will try using available skills. And specialists, people who use their own skills to interpret and analyze data. Now I'm going to run another quick poll. It will have a different code, I'm afraid, which is asking you which one of those 3 categories you feel you fit into. Right. Right, the voting seems to have slowed down now, and I think it's a great result that enthusiasts are winning, and there's also quite a good share of specialists in the audience. The Open Data Institute was another organisation founded by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, along with Nigel Shadbolt in 2012. The ODI's mission is to connect, equip, and inspire people around the world to innovate with data. They established this 5-star system for helping organisations to publish data openly. In 2015, the Scottish Government committed to setting level 3 as a baseline by 2020, saying we'll seek to publish our data as 3 stars and work towards, wherever appropriate and there's demand, offering it in higher formats. So that's the end of this first section about data. And so my concluding remarks: data is ever more important, and it's being used by government and business to increase productivity, but it's not having as much impact on the marginalized groups in our society. Okay, so it's now time to take any questions or comments on that section. Jen, are there any questions in the comments section?
No, not at the moment, Tim, but if anybody
Okay.
wants to come in, please feel free. Or pop your question in the chat. Perhaps everybody's getting going down rabbit holes with all the data that they've just found access to.
Well, you can save some up for later if anything occurs. I'll carry on.
It's a nice comment from Doug in the chat. I looked at the map of multiple deprivations. What a brilliant example of useful data and great tech. Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to be sharing the map, the published interactive map a little bit later on. He's quite right. So now I'm going to talk about geospatial data. Geospatial data is data that's got something that can link it to a position on Earth or in space. I'll be using Holyrood Palace as an example for explaining geospatial data in Scotland. On Google Maps, if you right-click on a location, it gives you these options, this bar that comes up. At the top, you can see some coordinates. So let's just quickly see what these mean. So the coordinates that came up on the left-hand side are the latitude, and on the right-hand side, the longitude. So talking about latitude, if you have a line that's from the center of the Earth to the equator, and another line which is from the center of the Earth to the place that you're interested in, then the latitude is the angle between those two lines. The North Pole would be at 90 degrees and the South Pole at minus 90 degrees latitude. The -3 number, the longitude, if you take the same approach but using the Greenwich meridian and doing it in the other axis, then it's the number of degrees to the east. Because of the fact that Edinburgh is to the west of Greenwich, that's why the number's negative. Longitude goes from minus 180 degrees to plus 180 degrees. Okay, so for the seekers out there, a little bit of a warning that there's some jargon that I'm going to be using now. As the note says, you don't really need to know this stuff, but I found it useful to learn this in order to be able to progress further. So the coordinate WGS 84, precisely locatable for taking maps where the distance between 2 points could be accurately measured. Distance Survey set a UK standard in 1936, which is widely used in UK and Scottish government open data. It's called OSGB 1936. OSGB 1936 is different from WGS 84. So those kind of coordinates that we got from Google are not the same as the kind of coordinates that we get from the Ordnance Survey. But it doesn't matter because there's lots of software that, that can convert them automatically without you even knowing. So now I'm going to talk about linking data to places. Let's take the information that we have about the Palace of Holyrood and add it to an Excel spreadsheet. I've named this Excel spreadsheet A point. Then if we go to Google My Maps, which is a free service available to people who have a Google account, you can make a simple map and you can share it or embed it in your website. So I've got a little video to run here. Click on Create a New Map. On the left, hasn't got there yet. On the left, there's a list of layers. There's only one layer in the list at the moment. If I click on Import and then follow the instructions, then I can select that Excel file that I've created. The screenshot video doesn't allow you to see the file I'm importing, but it's just the 2-line Excel that I created before, the A point file. It uploads the file, then cleverly identifies the coordinate columns that are most likely to match the latitude and longitude. It asks me to choose one piece of information as a title. Then it thinks a bit before displaying my point. When I click on the point, I get the information from the Excel nicely formatted. You could do this with hundreds of different locations, and you could separate them into layers and color code them in order to see patterns in the data. Okay, so I've been describing a point. Now let's look at a polygon. A polygon is a 2- or 3-dimensional shape, which is identified by coordinates at its edges. To make this simple, I've chosen a triangle, which is the simplest of shapes, and I've arbitrarily placed it over Edinburgh. I'll call it the Edinburgh triangle. Okay, so now a bit more technical jargon. There are different ways that geometry is represented using map software. One example is called well-known text. It's designed to be written by hand. It's not designed to be written by hand, but it's humanly readable. It's generated automatically normally. It's just useful for you to know that it exists. It's a particularly useful format because it can be used in a spreadsheet just as a line of text where you can enter other data. Another format that you'll see if you try to download UK government data rather than Scottish government data is KML. This stands for Keyhole Markup Language. This works directly with Google products like Google Earth and Google Maps. And it's nice because you only have to download one single file, which contains both the map and the data. The UK government also uses a format called GeoJSON, but that's enough of this technical stuff. You don't need to know how these things work really, just that they exist. The Scottish government tends to use the shapefile format. This is downloaded as a zip file and then needs to be extracted. It contains a bundle of files, as you can see in the lower box, which all need to be stored in the same folder to be useful. The one which is suffixed with .shp is the one that you'd use. I'll give examples of this later. All of these file types and others are very easily translated from one format to another with the right tools. Attaching data to a polygon is the same really as attaching it to the example that I gave of a point. Here, I've put the well-known text in my table and a temperature reading as a simple example of a piece of data. It's easy to modify the display style of the polygon to reflect the data. In this case, I'll color it from red to blue depending on the temperature reading and display the text of the name and the temperature in the middle of the shape. You can't do this directly in Google My Maps, but I'll show you software that you can use soon. So this is having changed the temperature in degrees from 18 to -5. Here's an example that I created to make a case for an educational charity that wanted to reuse a derelict building in a public park. Now I'm going to talk to you about where you can get these shapes from. But that's in the next section. So this is the end of part 2, geospatial. And to wrap it up, I'd say that places are defined by coordinates, which define their boundaries. Any kind of data can be associated with those coordinates, and there's free software that allows you to manipulate, store, and visualize the data in many ways. So I wonder if there are any questions now.
There was one question, Tim, where you were speaking, it was from Pamela.
Okay.
And Pamela asks, is open data having less or low impact on marginalized groups because there's less data on these groups, or data not applied for this purpose?
I would say that there's a lot of data available about marginalized groups, and increasingly more. Quite often, I think marginalized groups are quite highly represented as users of public services. And so every interaction that they have is recorded in some way. I would say that the reason that, that private businesses and governments are doing much better through becoming relatively more productive through the use of open data than marginalized groups in society is possibly because of the fact that the tools for using, for analyzing and understanding and increasing productivity through the use of that data perhaps aren't as available. And so I think that's part of the reason for why I'm sharing this this talk with you today. Is there anything else, or shall I move on?
Not in the chat, unless anybody wants to come in. Everybody's shy today. Nope. Okay.
I should say that I'm afraid I'm not looking at the chat because I've got too many things on my screen at once, and and they overlap one another. So I've got it switched off. So I need Jen to pick up anything that's relevant, please. So now I'm going to talk about statistical geographies using the same example of a place. The Office of National Statistics updates this chart that you can see on the screen quite regularly. Each of the coloured boxes represents a different set of shapes that are used to define boundaries in the UK. So let's filter out the ones which are relevant to Scotland. It's a bit lighter, but there's still a fair bit to get through. I'll start with postal geographies. The full postcode of Holyrood Palace might be allocated to a small number of properties, but in itself, it's not defined by boundaries. There are nearly 1.7 million unique postcodes in Scotland. That's one for each 3 people. It's in postcode sector EH8, which is a small shape. The postcode sector shapes are shown by the thin black lines on the map. The sectors nest into districts, which are shown in orange on the map. And these nest into areas, which are shown in red on the map. Next, administrative geographies. There are 32 council areas in Scotland and 354 electoral wards. You can see that in each of these little boxes, there's a code that begins with S. S is for Scotland, and the 2 digits following it identify the specific family of shapes. Now talking about health geographies, Scotland's got 14 health boards and 31 integration authorities. Moving on to statistical building blocks. These are the most commonly useful shapes for visualizing government data. They apply to the census and the indices of multiple deprivation and population statistics and many other things. As you can see, the average population of an output area in Scotland is 118 people, a data zone 782 people, and an intermediate zone 4,200. So here's the output area that Holyrood Palace sits in. Output areas are the smallest unit of statistical geography because of the fact that they may have as few as 50 residents or 20 households in Scotland. There's a lot of data that there's not a lot of data that's shared at this scale. It would be too hard to anonymize it. So this data is generally reserved for government statistics. I know there are cases, for example, in England, where you can get data on the typology of houses and roughly the period they were built for output areas. I haven't found the same thing for Scotland, but it might well exist as open data. Data zones, which is the next step up, are really, I think, the most useful measures for small geographies. That's because there's lots of data published for them. Here, I've overlaid the data zones in green on the output areas, which are in blue. And now I'm going to go to the website that somebody was referring to earlier, which is really great. And so if we zoom in on Edinburgh, it's loading data zones, as we can see. And it won't let me close that. Okay. So the data zones here are indicated by the different colors. And as you move over these data zones, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, those S01 codes changing as we move from one data zone to another. And in the lower graphic, we can see all of the different metrics for those data zones. So the place where my mouse is located at the moment, Hillside and Carlton Hill, we can see that in nearly all metrics, the decile of deprivation in nearly all of the domains, sorry, is 10, which is the least deprived. It's really interactive and useful. There are times when you might want to kind of look at this data from a different angle that the website doesn't allow you to do. So I'm going to be later on demonstrating how you can do that with free tools. Intermediate zones, which are the next step up, are a bit bigger. There may be more metrics available for them because of the fact that they're more anonymized, but they don't pick up the really local granularity of places because they have an average population of over 4,000 people. I've overlaid them in orange on top of the data zones and the output areas. 2011 census geographies I think are no longer particularly relevant so far as I can see, because they're the areas that we use for collecting and agglomerating census data rather than publishing results, which is where the data zones that I described just now are useful. The other geographies section includes lots of different boundaries which are used, for example, by the police, by courts, by fire services, by economic agencies. The travel to work areas are useful for economic data about employment and business sectors and commuting patterns. For example, in the census, if you're asked for the postcode of where you work, this data will inform the daytime population of that place. And in the recent English census, I think this will have been badly screwed up by the work from home period. So there's likely to be a lack of reliable workplace data for the next decade or so. So just a reminder that the geographies with an S code are used by organisations cataloguing data in Scotland. Another thing, the codes on the left-hand side of these boxes, for example, NPark, are often used for naming the files that you can download related to that particular geography. So if I go to the, in this case, the Office for National Statistics website and type in NPark, then I immediately have a file to download of the boundaries of the national parks of Great Britain. The Eurostat section, these boundaries have been really extremely useful for making comparisons with other European countries and between regions across national borders. And for accessing data held by the European Union, which is often more easily accessible than national government data. But now I suspect its use will be more historical. And finally, talking about electoral geographies, Scotland has 343 electoral wards, 59 MPs in Westminster, and 73 MSPs. So obviously the boundaries between the Edinburgh constituencies and the Scottish Parliament constituencies don't generally or always coincide. So at the end of the statistical geography section, I'd say that different organizations define places with different boundaries, and that over time these boundaries change. They're constantly changing in one way or another. Understanding which boundaries apply to the data that you're using will help you to find useful data. That's the end of that section. So I'll have a look at the comments now. Has anything come up?
There was a question from something you mentioned before, Tim.
Yeah.
Someone would like to know what the data source that you spoke about for building types and year of build was.
Sorry, I was distracted by something. Could you repeat?
No worries. Someone's looking to know the data source about building types and the year of build that you mentioned previously.
I suspect that it's the Ministry of Housing, Culture and Local Government website, but the UK government has I think it's data.gov.uk, which has a pretty comprehensive collection of nearly all of the kind of ministerial data that's published from different Westminster or Whitehall ministries. I'll carry on. So next I'm going to talk about visualizing data. We're going to make a map using Scottish Government open data, and we're going to see what it can reveal about a place that might otherwise have been unapparent. So going back to the index of multiple deprivation, some of the geographies that I've described, all of the geographies that I've described are available from one place or another, but there isn't, so far as I know, a single store for or a single directory of all open data. I have found this website, which I don't think is an official government website. It's hosted on GitHub, and it provides useful links to open data portals from various different councils from around Scotland, as well as from the Scottish Government. So going back to the presentation, in this case, I've headed to the spatialdata.gov.scot website, where I found the 2020 Index of Multiple Deprivation to download. So that's the same data that we were seeing on the interactive government website. I'll be downloading that shapefile. So how did I come across this page? Well, I think that if you know the terminology for what you're looking for, and you Google it, just with the word shapefile or data or both after the term, so in this case, SIMD shapefile or shapefile data, that typically takes you to the right place pretty quickly. I'm going to share a useful resource. Oh no, I've already shared the useful resource. Now I'm going to show you what you can do with this. So by clicking on the download link, you download that data. It's quite a large. I think it's maybe 20 or 30 megabytes, this particular file, and it downloads as a shapefile. I'll come on to that later. Sorry. Okay, so the program that we're going to use for looking at this is a piece of software which is called QGIS. You need to install this on a computer. I was going to show you how to do everything online, but actually QGIS is much better than using several different services on the web. It's totally free. It's developed and maintained by volunteers who form a massive online community, and they're typically very kind and generous with their time if you ask them stupid questions. There's a Stack Exchange website called gis.stackexchange.com, where you can look for answers to any technical questions you've got around QGIS, or ask the community if you can't find the answers. And people tend to be very responsive. So if you go to the qgis.org website and click download now, then they give you various different options. For a normal Windows installation, choose the third one down, which is called standalone installer version. If you're using an Apple computer, scroll further down that same screen and there's the Apple options. So QGIS itself is 391 megabytes, so it's quite a large program. It might take a few minutes to download. It doesn't need a very powerful computer to be used, I've found. Although it does need about 1.8 gigabytes of free space to work. There are 4 steps to installation. It's very easy. You just click next, agree, next, install. So this is what I see when I've just done a new install of the program. So if you click on the new empty project box, then what you get is, I'm going to switch off the PowerPoint presentation. What you see is a screen like this. And now I'm going off script. So earlier on, I downloaded sorry, bear with me a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a moment as I find the folder that I was looking for. Okay, so this might look a little bit like flying a jumbo jet, but it's actually very, very simple if you start with a few simple steps and then you gradually experiment. So I'm going to demonstrate that to you. What we're going to start off by doing is...
sorry, you just need to remember to share again.
Oh. Oh, sorry. Oh. Screen 1. Am I sharing?
You are.
And you can see the QGIS screen, correct?
We can see 2 desktop browser windows. You've just closed them now.
Oh, I'm on the wrong screen. Sorry. Share screen. Screen 2. Do you see my cursor moving?
Yes, that's us.
Perfect. Right, so at the bottom right of this screen, you can see that code that I told you about, the ESPG4326, which is a coordinate system. And what I'm going to do is click on XYZ tiles and load the first layer. This on the bottom left, we've got a space for layers to build up on top of each other. The first layer I'm going to put in is OpenStreetMap, which gives me a map of the world. Now, you can see that it's come out kind of distorted relative to how you would normally see a map. That's because of the fact that this setting here actually doesn't need to be 4326. I'm not going to go into the detail of why, because it's too confusing, but just to say that it works for me to always have it set on WGS84 pseudo Mercator, which I understand is the same coordinate system that online maps use. So I'm just going to click OK, and we've got a normal map. So earlier on, I created that file which I called Edinburgh Triangle. Now, I saved that file as CSV. CSV stands for comma separated values. Seen as simple text, what that Excel worksheet turned into is what you can see here in this yellow box. The top line is the row of the headings, the headers, which are separated by commas, which is why it's called comma separated text, comma separated values. On the second row is the values themselves, which are separated by commas. Because of the fact that, for example, this what's called a string of text, which has got our well-known text in it, has got its own commas in. If that line is enclosed in, this stuff happens automatically, but if that line is enclosed in speech marks, then those commas aren't read by the program. Now, so I've saved that file as a CSV file, and I'll leave this again and open the folder, workshop resources, and it's here. Just to show you what's in there live, just in a text editor. So that's what I've just been showing you on the screen. Now what I'm going to do is just drag this CSV file on top of my map. And it's come in as another layer, but I can't see it, and there's a question mark. So I just click on that question mark. And the reason that I can't see it is that the program doesn't know what coordinate reference system is needed. Now in this case, as I said before, it's WGS84. So we just select WGS84, say OK, and there is the triangle that I selected, that I created for Edinburgh, for covering Edinburgh. Now, if I have this information button highlighted at the top, and I click on that triangle, then on the right-hand side of my screen, can I just confirm you are seeing my screen? Yes?
Yes, we can see the big red triangle.
Yeah. Okay, so on the right-hand side of my screen, you can see the information on that we've got the name that I allocated it, the geographical information, and the temperature in degrees centigrade that I just typed in manually. Okay, so if I wanted to, for example, see this in Google Maps, then what I would need to do is to right click over that layer, say export, save features as, and here I change from comma separated value to something that that can be read in another program. So KML is the example of the software that I said that the Scottish government's using. I need to identify where I'm going to put that. I'll just stick it on my desktop and call it triangle. And then I think everything looks okay. Check that the CRS is always 4326 WGS 84. Say OK, and it's put it in as another layer, which now is a KML file, which could be used in a different software package. So it could be used on, it could be dropped into Google Earth or whatever. Okay, so with that really simple example finished, I'm going to delete these two layers and look at something a little bit more complex. So earlier on, I downloaded I showed you how I downloaded the Scottish indices of multiple deprivation. So that was unzipped and it turned into this folder. This is the typical shapefile folder. So what I do in this case is I take the one which has the suffix SHP and just drag that onto the screen. There are other ways of loading layers, but this is the easiest typically. And you can see that really quickly, and I'm not using a fancy computer, it's loaded all of that data onto the screen. Now, if I click on a shape on this map, it gives me loads and loads of information about that particular place. It's all kind of codified, but I looked up earlier to see if I could find out what those codes mean, and quite quickly came across an Excel spreadsheet. It's actually stored inside here, glossary. Which gives me a definition for every one of those codes. So if we look at the crime count, for example, number of, no, that's a little bit negative. Okay, the percentage of school pupil attendance, which is going to be edu attend. Go back to here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to color in this map according to the proportion of educational attendance. So by clicking on the colored area is indicating that that this is pink. If I double click on that, then there's this simple fill which is pink. I could change that to make it green, for example, and that's changed everything to green. Now, where this gets more interesting is if I change this to graduated. When it's graduated, I can select a field within that folder which I can then use to color the map. So I think it was, I don't remember the field that I was going to look at. Well, educational attainment. Now, if I click classify at the bottom of this screen, then educational attainment goes from 0 to 7 in this particular, or 6.88 in this particular field. And so it's divided up that scale into 5 equal groups. I could change the number of classes that it divides it up with here. Okay, so this is where the magic happens. If I click apply, and you can move all of these windows around to get a better view and so on, then we can see a map of educational attainment. Now, what I don't know is whether I've got it the right way around. If I return to that previous screen, so 0, I don't know if 0 is bad or good, that's my problem. But let's say that I need the colors to be the other way around. Then I click on this little arrow and say invert color ramp, apply, and it's turned it the other way around. Now, this isn't so great because we can't see we can't see where we're looking at. We can't see what's underneath it. So if I then go back into that same place again by double clicking on the little icon there, and it's the transparency. A little bit more. I can change the transparency so that I can see what areas I'm looking at. And then if I wanted to change the field that I'm investigating, so for example, employment rank, then I just go back into this area here and I change from educational attainment to employment rank. Oh, and then I've got to go classify and apply. So we're very quickly seeing all sorts of different information here. It's not a very difficult step to combine other data to these shapes. It's just a case of uploading a comma-separated values file, a CSV file just exported from Excel that doesn't need to have shapes in it, but needs to have the same codes. That's where those area codes that I was describing earlier come in really useful. So if we look at the detail for this shape here, then we can see the data zone code, the S01 code for that area. So if you have other data which isn't within this data set, which came all complete, which has also got that same code in it, then you can link those two things together very easily in order to continue kind of building different ways of visualizing the place that you're looking at. Wrong project, wrong. So that's the end of this section on visualizing data. There are lots of different software platforms which are available for visualizing data. And of course, not everything is maps. I've chosen to introduce you to QGIS because it's free, it's got lots of support, and it's much easier really than it looks. Do we have any questions now, Jen?
No questions in the chat just now, Tim.
Okay, so that kind of wraps up what I had prepared for today. I think that the lack of questions has left me with about 10 minutes free. So if anybody can think of anything that they'd like to share or to ask, then that would be great.
Yeah, please do. Even, what do you think, Tim? You and I could hang about until 3:30 if anybody wants to maybe speak in a smaller group.
That would be fine, yeah.
They'd be more than
Absolutely.
welcome to hang about.
Yeah. So before people start to leave, though, I'd like to say that first of all, thank you very much for attending, and I really hope it's been worth your while. I'm going to be producing a crib sheet to accompany the presentation when it gets posted online, and Jen's offered to share that with you. In the next sessions, because I'm doing a session next Friday and then the following Friday, and I'm going to be talking. So feel free to leave or feel free to ask a question as you like. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just a quick note to say that I've popped a link into the chat for the upcoming workshops on the Third Sector Lab website. They are massively subscribed and I've actually closed them for registration at the moment. But if you are a grant holder for any of our supporting organisations of the Curve, that is the William Grant Foundation, the Robertson Trust, RS McDonald Charitable Trust, Inspiring Scotland, or the National Lottery Community Fund. If your organisation is a member of any of those a grant holder of any of those organisations, please drop me an email. It's jennifer@thirdsectorlab.co.uk, and I'll make sure that you are included in that session. We're prioritising grant holders of our sponsors. The other thing I've popped in the chat is a really short feedback form. If you've got 2 minutes, it'd be great if you could just share your thoughts in the session with us. And as we kind of discussed, we'll kind of hang about here for the next kind of 8 minutes or so. If anybody wants to ask questions in a smaller group, you're more than welcome to stick about. But thanks for coming along. Hope to see you at another session soon, and enjoy your weekend. Get it started nice and early.